Oh, so Eileen, where'd they go? They're all congratulating each other already. Mary Beth, the whole Wow You group, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Oh, goodness. So, is there anybody here who's not heard the story of the Good Samaritan? The Good Samaritan, see? So 100%. We had one person in first service, but now she's taken care of. She knows. This is probably the most popular, well-known parable Jesus ever told. Matter of fact, if you think about it, maybe you've lived in a town where they have a hospital called the Good Samaritan. Nursing homes called the Good Samaritan. So it's been around, and it's an indication of how we need to be, I think, in a given situation. As we look at this parable, first of all, I want you to know where it took place and understand the conditions. Jerusalem is up here. Jericho's down in the valley. Jerusalem is 3,600 feet above Jericho. And the Jericho road was a road going through the mountains, twisting and winding, and a very dangerous road just by itself to travel on. They say that you can be in a truck today and look down at the crevices, and when you're in that bus, you're looking down and all you see is the valley below. So it's a very dangerous place to be, even at best of things, in the best of things. But Jericho Road had a reputation. That's why Jesus used it as an example. And this is just a story. It's not something that probably ever happened. But Jesus used it as an example when he answered the young lawyer, who was a Levite, the guy, and he was answering this guy when he asked him the question, who is my neighbor? Because Jesus said to him, what are the two commandments? This guy gave them to Jesus because he would know that. Two greatest commandments, okay? Love the Lord thy God with all their heart, all their soul, and all their mind. And then love your neighbors yourself. And so the young man was kind of testing Jesus. And what happened was he got the answer he was supposed to get, and he didn't know what to do except say, well, who's your neighbor? Hoping Jesus would stumble with that. And so Jesus gave this story of the Good Samaritan. Now, there's some characters you have to understand a little bit. First of all, there is the priest. The priest, in Jewish times, served in the temple. He was the highest of all the spiritual leaders in that day and time. And in serving in the temple, he had certain boundaries that he had to understand. First of all, he could not touch anybody who was unclean. That was the rule. You cannot touch this person who's unclean. So this priest comes up, sees a guy who's been beat up, sees a guy who is unclean, and says, oh my gosh, I got to go to a local temple, and I've got to do a service, and I can't go in unclean, so I'm going to go and detour around this man. That was his thinking. That's what he was trained to do. Then there was the Levite, and he comes from the tribe of Levi. And the tribe of Levi were not, they were like associate ministers. I want to use that, or licensed unity teacher in unity, where they served with the priest and for the priest many times. More so for the priest in that day and time. So that person had to also stay clean, but that person could have stopped, but what he probably did was consider the fact that there just might be a robber around the next crevice waiting for him. So if he went over and helped the man, you see, he would get beat up, he would get robbed. And that was just too much risk. So he went around the person. But then comes along a Samaritan. Now, a Samaritan, and the reasons Jesus used this, a Samaritan was considered to be the half-breed, the lowest caste of people in that area. Because most of them had married, who were Jewish, had married pagans, as they called them. And when they married a pagan, they would bring into their homes maybe the idols of that pagan, and they would start to worship it. And so therefore, they were considered to be not so good Jews, okay? They were considered to be less than. And they were a part of the society that was looked down upon by the Jewish folks. Now remember that Jesus visited a woman, first of all, that's a big deal in that day and time, at a well in Samaria. So he went through Samaria, and good Jews didn't go through Samaria. And they certainly didn't honor or talk to a Samaritan woman. But he did. So Jesus obviously saw that differently. And so he said it was a Samaritan who was coming down the road, and when he went over and helped this person, as we saw. Now, there are several things here that are important to understand. And that's that trip down that Jericho Road, which drops 3,600 feet down into the valley, which was considered to be, if you would, a place that represented violence and oppression, that if you went on the road, you probably would get beat up, you'd probably get robbed if you didn't have help with you. It represents pain. It represents suffering. It is a symbol of the violence we see in our world at times, if we want it to be. The Jericho Road, and there is a way to travel it. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, because most of us travel the Jericho Road at some time in our lives, have traveled it. And what we do in a time like this is we are preparing ourselves in case there's another Jericho Road to know how to maneuver and move through it. I've told this joke before, but there was a fellow who was walking through a cemetery one night, and he fell in a grave site because they had just dug up. And it was about 7 to 8 feet down. Not 6 feet, 7 to 8 feet down. This guy was about 5 foot tall. So he would jump, couldn't get out. He'd jump, couldn't get out. Finally, there was a Unity minister who walked by. Looked down at him, and the fellow said, "Help me, help me." The minister said, "I'm on the way to a prayer meeting. I'm going to pray you out of this. Don't forget the law of mind action," as he left. Then there was another guy walking through. And he saw the guy. And the guy said, "Help me, help me." And the guy said, "What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the police station. I'm going to find somebody. I'm going to come back, and they'll get you out." Nothing happens. Then another fellow walks through. He says, "Help me, help me." And the guy jumps down, and he's about 5 feet tall, jumps down into the grave with him. And the guy said, "What'd you do that for?" He said, "Because I've been here before, and I know the way out." Okay? You see? Kind of important, isn't it? He knows the way out. So you and I know the way out when we find ourselves, if you would, on the Jericho Road. The Jericho Road is really the tenements of our cities. It is being homeless with no help. It is experiencing an illness without hope. It is being a caregiver for years and then filled up with a burnout. It is being burnt out on a job where you have no desire to go back. You have no desire to be there. It is being separated from a child due to differences of opinion from the past that haven't been healed. Being on the Jericho Road affects each of us separately. One of the things when I was much younger, I was about 18 years old as I recall. Had to be a little younger than that because I was on the way to Montgomery Ward's where I worked. And I was driving down Warwick Boulevard in Newport News, and the guy had a motorcycle accident. He didn't have a helmet on. His head was really bashed. And 2 or 3 people stopped, and I stopped, and we went over, and we looked at the guy. And everybody walked up, and then they would step back, including Richard. And I looked for a few minutes at him. I looked at the others, and I was an Eagle Scout, so I should have known how to do a little bit of first aid, and I did actually. But what I did, I didn't have the equipment with me. And so what I did was I finally, after, it might have been 5 minutes, I don't know, kneeled down and tried to help the guy. He may have been dead by then, for all I know. Somebody went and called the ambulance, they got there, and they took him away. I doubt that he made it. But that has always bothered me, that I hesitated, that I wasn't willing to touch that which was not clean. I froze because I didn't know what to do. And I was there with this man on the Jericho Road, and I was not the Good Samaritan. That's always bothered me. I don't think it's scarred me, but it's helped me remember what I can be rather than what I was. What I am now rather than what I was, because I've had that opportunity in a couple of situations to help people out. And so you don't freeze, you stay in the moment. you and I can either be the victim on the Jericho Road, or we can even see the other person as a victim. You know there's no difference between the two? If you see the other person as a victim, you're feeling sorry for them. You're seeing them as less than. If you see yourself as a victim, you're feeling sorry for yourself. You're seeing yourself as less than. And when we feel like we are the victim, we feel trapped. We feel like we don't know where to go. We don't know what step to take next. We don't know how to help because we are so paralyzed by this idea of being a victim that we can't think clearly. We can't allow Spirit to move in and through us. And so we get confused when we find ourselves on the Jericho Road. But there is an answer. There is a song called On the Jericho Road. And it says, on the Jericho Road, I take Jesus with me. Now, I'm not talking about literally. But if Jesus is our way shower, why not let Jesus guide us through the Jericho Road in our life? Why not talk to Jesus about that? We're going to show it again, but many of you saw the film on Jesus by Reverend Paul Smith. Powerful. Of how we can allow Jesus to be in our lives and yet not worship Jesus as the only Son of God. We can still have a friend in Jesus. And when we're on the Jericho Road, we can take advantage of that and ask for guidance and support. The Jericho Road that we find ourselves in is really a call for action. And there's several things I'd like to mention. Number one, the first call is to be compassionate. Compassionate means that I take action. That when I'm on the Jericho Road or somebody else is on the Jericho Road, I kneel beside them, I help them, I support them. And I also call for help. But I don't go onto a prayer meeting because I don't have time. I don't go and stop or not stop because there is a business deal that I might lose out on. I continue on, and I stop with that person instead of continuing on. And I find myself again allowing Spirit to lead me on the Jericho Road. The second thing is that I cannot not take a risk. There used to be, and there are now, there used to be no Good Samaritan laws for a while. People would stop and help people and get sued if they did anything wrong. Today, in all 50 states, and Puerto Rico, okay, there are Good Samaritan laws. And the Good Samaritan law says anybody can stop, a doctor, a nurse, a trained person, untrained person, and help the person as best of their ability. And they cannot be found liable. So that took the risk out of it for some folks, because for a while people weren't stopping because of that. People still misunderstand it. So we can learn to take a risk. And when we are able to help somebody on Jericho Road, then we are taking some risk ourselves. Maybe the risk is that our friends don't think we're doing the right thing. How ridiculous. Maybe the risk is that I'll be late to work and my boss will get on my case. These are the simple risks that we deal with sometimes. Maybe the risk is that I'm not willing to be that compassionate and have that kind of mercy. Those are unacceptable risks. And so what we need to do is learn to take the risk by staying and being with that person, not to rationalize the risk away. The next thing we can't do is play the blame game. You could go up to that person lying on the road and say, in the parable, and say, what caused this? Well, I'm angry about this because somebody did this to you. And run off and leave the person there to make sure that we get the world right so we wouldn't have that again. We do that out of anger, it doesn't work. It creates more anger. You may say, well, somebody's to blame and we ought to catch them, and I'm going to take care of that right away. And so what I'm going to do is go back and I'm going to have some laws changed so this doesn't happen again. That's the blame game. Let go of blame. It does no good, because if we keep blaming people, the Good Samaritan, or the traveler, the victim in this case, as we call them, ends up dying anyway. We got to stay in the situation. We have to stay in the situation so we make a difference in their lives. The next thing we have to do, if we're going to be on the road to Jericho, is we have to be in the moment. The Good Samaritan was a traveler also. Maybe he did have somewhere important to be. Maybe he gave up a contract that he would have had if he hadn't stopped. We know that he gave up money. We know that he said, I'm going to take care of this no matter what, and took the person to an inn. Now, it was not a Marriott, okay, in that day and time. The inn was usually somebody's house that had an attached, not garage, shed, and that's where they kept the person and took care of the person. But this Good Samaritan took him there and then said, take care of him, and I'll come back and take care of the rest of the bill. I guess in today's world, the first question shouldn't be, do you have insurance? But it's one you might think about, okay? And maybe in today's world we wouldn't be agreed to do that because there are hospitals that would let them in. But the point is that to be in the moment means I don't let myself think about all the risks, think about the blame, think about all the stuff that's going on. But I step into Spirit and I allow Spirit to be my guide, to be the one that carries me forth, to be the one that I stay in touch with in the moment so I can be guided. So, Jesus showed one cannot hate another human being and still claim to love God. That's what he was saying. He was saying our love for God and man is best expressed when showing mercy to people in need. That's not always the case, I don't think. It's listening to someone who needs to talk, but maybe you don't think you have the time. And that can be hard to do. It's visiting someone who maybe hasn't had anyone visit them for quite a while. It's volunteering to be a visiting chaplain in a new program we're developing here at Unity of Richmond, so that somebody is visiting people when they have a time of need. Maybe taking a meal. Maybe finding somebody who can stay with them for a while. You see, there are a lot of ways in which we can show up and show our love. Jesus said, as you heard a few minutes ago, love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. And that means be the Good Samaritan. The person lying on the roadside may have been a priest, but because he was beat up and had no clothing, the priest didn't know. He may have been a Levite, but because that guy was naked and had no clothing, he didn't know. And so he left him by the roadside. The Good Samaritan didn't care who he was, what he looked like, what his race was, what his sexual orientation was. He didn't stop and ask any of those questions. Instead, he helped that individual out in his time of need. So, let's travel the Jericho road in the Christ consciousness. As the Christ was willing to take action, be compassionate, and let love, not fear, be our anger. We say we are a church without walls, and we are. We are growing and growing in that capacity. And we'll continue to. I believe that with all my heart. Because we're making a difference right here in Richmond, Virginia. We're making a difference in North Carolina. We made a difference in Florida not long ago. We are making a difference in this community. And the big plus is that many of you are so active in the community that you are